Okay, so we've got some big updates when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 and some Xbox games that are going to be coming to the platform. This is something that we know was kind of coming because Phil Spencer has been adamant about supporting the Nintendo Switch 2, but it seems like it's going to be happening more sooner than later. Now, we've seen Microsoft come out and already support the Nintendo Switch 1 with games like Pentiment in addition to Grounded, but some people were looking for some of the other big games, notably Halo Master Chief Collection. That seems to be a hot one that people are throwing out there, or even Forza Horizon 5, which recently launched on the PlayStation 5 to huge success, million plus copies sold. So definitely Microsoft is doing well over there, but I do think that it looks like it's time, potentially even at an upcoming Nintendo Direct, that we could be hearing about some announcements, or even just closer once the Nintendo Switch 2 actually launches, something could happen, because we've got dual reports now from two separate places that something could be happening soon. The Verge's Tom Warren, who's really good at reporting Microsoft stuff overall, what Microsoft is doing. So I do think that what his report is saying here is accurate, because he states that in a new article, Microsoft is also working on some Xbox ports for Nintendo Switch 2, which I expect we'll hear about soon. So you have that coming. Obviously, once again, we don't know what those ports are going to be, but it does seem like something's going to be happening pretty soon here. I think once the Nintendo Switch 2 actually launches, and then we get into the first wave of games and some of the other titles, you want to make sure that you spread out some of these game releases, or you have it for maximum impact at a Nintendo Direct. So I do expect some of Microsoft's games to be announced at a Nintendo Direct, because Pentiment and Grounded were also announced at a Nintendo Direct. With the bump in horsepower and specs for the Nintendo Switch 2, I do expect maybe even Sea of Thieves, that game, can come over to the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. Already on PlayStation, did really well there. So there's a number of games. There's even been rumors about Starfield. That's actually been rumored multiple times when it comes to that game coming over. So maybe Starfield comes over, maybe Fable in the future. That's a game that I think could do really well on the Nintendo Switch 2 because of the RPG nature of the game. So I do think that it is happening soon here. We're starting to hear multiple reports. Now, the other report is coming from Nate the Hate, Nate Drake. You guys know him. He's been very accurate on a number of things. And this was under a post that was on Twitter where someone talked about Ninja Theory bringing over Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 to the PlayStation 5. That's been confirmed, recently announced. It's an enhanced edition. And then now Nate the Hate says, next up, Xbox games coming to Switch 2 underneath that post. So yeah, looks like more reports are coming in. More people are saying that it's going to be happening more sooner than later. Some people are even talking about potentially Gears of War, stuff like that. I think Gears of War, the remastered, I think that game's definitely going to come over as well. So yeah, definitely looking good so far when it comes to Xbox supporting Nintendo Switch 2. Once again, Phil Spencer did say that they're going to be doing that. And this is pretty much the next evolution of what Microsoft is doing. They're going to be, yes, they are a console platform like Valve has, like the Steam Deck, but that doesn't mean that they're exclusive, right? Microsoft is going to full third party, but still making their own content. So they would just want to become the biggest publisher and still have hardware out on the market. That's what they're looking to do. Now, and I do think that their console sales are obviously tanking because of this approach, but their software sales have been significantly rising because they're selling millions of copies of these games on PlayStation and now soon to be the Nintendo Switch 2. Plus, they also sold millions of copies of Minecraft. That's been doing great on Nintendo platforms. But Grounded and Pentiment have also done okay as well. So the fact that you're just putting all of this stuff out there, I think Microsoft will actually become the biggest publisher, if they're not already there, when it comes to the sheer amount of games that they're putting out and revenue kind of coming in from those select games. So it looks like the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to have a wide variety of software, not only from Nintendo and third parties, but also Microsoft throwing their former, I guess, first party type of games or their published games behind the Nintendo Switch 2. So that should be fun to see. But before we get into the next topic, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, especially if you're looking for the best Nintendo Switch 2 content. We're going to have a ton leading up to the launch and of course afterwards. And also click that notification bell to get my vids as soon as they drop, as we're dropping new content pretty much daily on the channel. All right, let's get into the next topic here, guys, and we're going to discuss what is going on with Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, because we did get some redesigns when it comes to Donkey Kong that people have been talking about, and we also got a slight redesign for Diddy Kong, so let's check that out as well. But also, Mr. Miyamoto talked to IGN recently about the redesigns of Donkey Kong, and IGN asked this first about the redesign. You created Donkey Kong on pieces of paper. He's your baby. Donkey Kong 94, you were a producer on that. It was one of the first times he became more expressive. He's back with a new game. He's got a new design. What's it like seeing that character's new design now and seeing the character grow up with you? Miyamoto responded with this: so when it comes to character creation and working with characters, I still take an active role in that. And looking back to the first generation Donkey Kong Country, we worked with Rare to create Donkey Kong Country. When we were talking about trying to create new versions, evolving Donkey Kong, we created the game called Jungle Beat. We worked together with the team that made 3D Mario. With the technology that was available at the time, we were able to make Donkey Kong more expressive. And going back to the design that Rare came up with, we reevaluated what can we do with the design to make it more expressive. And then when it comes to the movie, we decided to move forward with this new generation Donkey Kong design. So essentially, they redesigned him so they can make him more expressive and kind of fit in line with the movie. And I think it makes complete sense overall from what they've shown. Same thing goes with what they showed off with Diddy Kong as well. We've got some nice quality renders of that, and Diddy Kong looks really good. They pretty much did the Donkey Kong Returns poses from the cover of that game. They redid those with the new designs, and it looks great. Diddy looks more expressive, Donkey Kong looks more expressive, and the great thing about this is that you see that expression in Donkey Kong Bonanza. Anytime Donkey Kong punches something, he rips something off from the ground, he falls, he hits his head on something, whatever happens, that expressiveness is more vivid and more live than ever, than any of his previous games. And I think that with this game, Donkey Kong Bonanza, it's going to fall in line with what we saw with the movie. The movie, Donkey Kong was incredibly strong. He was completely bopping people overall, and that's what you're doing in Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think that the new expressions, in addition to the game that we're getting with them, it melds and it fits way better for this new generation of Donkey Kong, and I cannot wait to see how it goes forward. I'm hoping that Bonanza does really well. I'm not sure if they want to turn this into a series like the Donkey Kong Country games, or like what they've done before with Donkey Kong Country Returns, then Tropical Freeze, but I do think that Bonanza has a really cool gameplay hook, and there's way more that they haven't even shown. I did get some people asking me, is it just destroying things or ripping stuff off from the ground? But no, if you check out the actual debut trailer, you see like there's still minecarts and there's still 2D levels and other things that you're going to be doing, going through barrels and stuff. So there's going to be more elements that they're not talking about now at this point, but I think that we could get another big Nintendo Direct that maybe talks about it more before the July release, or even a direct focus on Donkey Kong Bonanza as well. So that'd be pretty fun, or just more like an overview trailer. I think any of those are possible before the launch of Donkey Kong Bonanza, but I love what they're doing so far with the expression and the new look of Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong. As an old school fan, I was playing since the beginning Donkey Kong originally when it comes to the arcade game and everything, and I played Donkey Kong Country. I played pretty much every single Donkey Kong game and beat almost all of them, so I'm a big fan and I cannot wait to play Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think it's going to be a ton of fun as well. Now let's go and move on to the next topic here, guys, and we're going to be discussing what's going on with Rayman, because it looks like Rayman is back in it, but for a big budget game. What's going on with Ubisoft here? A big budget Rayman game? It's been a decade plus since they've been funding anything to do when it comes to a big game with Rayman in it. So let's talk about this. So Ubisoft Milan is apparently hiring for this big budget, brand new Rayman game, and it looks like they're looking for a senior game designer and a 3D gameplay animator. Now, we don't know how far along the development is in at this point or anything, but I can only guess that the Nintendo Switch 2 absolutely inspired them to make a 3D big Rayman game. One of the big inspirations for them to even have Rayman Legends and to bring Rayman back in that way, and Rayman Origins, was the Nintendo systems. The Wii, and then of course the Wii U was an exclusive before the sales fell off of a cliff and they decided to make it multi-platform, but that's fine. It was built for the Wii U first and foremost, and I do think that the Nintendo Switch 2 probably inspired them to maybe make something because of the upgraded specs, because of the rapport that Rayman has done on the Nintendo Switch 1 in addition to the Wii U, how it sold. I think it sold definitely best or better on the Nintendo platform. So I do think that a big budget 3D Rayman or a big 3D Rayman game on Nintendo Switch 2, and of course other platforms as well, but headlining that for Switch 2, that would be incredible, especially if it was announced like at a Nintendo Direct, for great exposure as well. That's something that I would love to see. I played Rayman Legends back on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. It's a fantastic game. I even played it on the Xbox One as well. I played Rayman Origins. I've played the old school games as well, and I've always been, I would say, not the biggest fan of Rayman, but a fan of Rayman. I think the games are good. He's not my favorite when it comes to platforming games and stuff like that, but it's still a ton of fun whenever you play the Rayman games. And Rayman Legends is one of the best 2D platformers of all time. So to see them working on a big 3D game, I think probably using the power of the Nintendo Switch 2, the hybrid nature and everything, I think that's going to be really cool. And to see it back in 3D for the first time in decades. We haven't had a new 3D Rayman game since like, what, the 6th generation or something like that. So yeah, that would be pretty exciting too. But I'm guessing it's still a little bit off. But we'll see when they actually announce something like this. But definitely exciting to see that Rayman is coming back in some way, shape, or form with a big brand new game. All right, let's get into the last topic here, guys. We're going to talk about another interesting Nintendo Switch 2 launch title, and that is Fast Fusion. We've got some tech specs for the game overall with resolution and frame rate, and it's very interesting in terms of how they've actually talked about this, and it's got some people confused, so I definitely want to clear that up as well when it comes to the tech specs, which we will once we get through it. So let's just start off with the Fast Fusion performance modes. We've got docked and handheld. So in the performance mode, it's going to be 1080p 60 frames per second with HDR, balanced 1440p 60 frames per second with HDR. Quality mode is mixed 4K 1080p with 60 frames per second HDR, menus and HUD overlays in 4K. So interesting docked mixed performance there overall with 4K overlays but 1080p gameplay. Might get you the best of both worlds overall if you're trying to test out some 4K elements, but then also have that smooth gameplay as well. Next up is the ultra quality mode. This is all docked, 4K 30 frames per second with HDR, super sharp visuals, ultra level of detail, ultra quality 4K/8K shadow maps. So that's the thing that kind of tripped people up, was the 8K shadow maps. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. Handheld mode, we've got performance 1080p 60 frames per second with HDR. Ultra quality is 1080p 30 frames per second HDR with ultra level of detail, ultra quality 4K/8K shadow maps. So this is all great. Obviously, Shinin, they've done a great job with their game. The performance, it's going to be rock solid. No 120 frames per second mode, but they did state that they are already working on more content for the game. So maybe that comes in an update with new content. You also get 120 frames per second mode as well. So that'd be pretty cool. So I wanted to get into that because some people were kind of confused with what Shinin is talking about when it comes down to this. And shout out to my man, Nate Drake, once again. He actually cleared this up on his Direct Feed Games Twitter account, where we said that Shinin are the masters of what they do, but there was a ton of misunderstanding around the mention of 4K/8K shadow maps. We had HD textures. Switch 1 can load 16K textures. By doing 8K shadow maps, they will look detailed on a 4K display. It has nothing to do with the power or output. So just keep that in mind, guys. Some people were kind of going nuts with that, saying, oh my gosh, you can do 8K. It's actually 8K game. No, it's not doing that, guys. It's not doing that at all. It's just like the textures and then, of course, the downsampling. Or it's just like nothing to do with that. It's just what they originally load into there. So just keep that in mind. It's going to make the game look really clean, though. The game's going to look really clean depending on what setting you want to play it on. Obviously, they have mixed 4K and 1080p. They have a 1440p 60 frames per second mode while docked. I think that might be a pretty good mode to play at standard, the balanced. I'm not really sure what's going on here though, because the performance mode is 1080p 60 frames per second with HDR. The balanced mode docked is 1440p 60 frames per second with HDR. So like, it's the same. So you might as well just play, if you have a TV that can do 1440p, you might as well just play in the balanced mode so you can get that extra bit of resolution there because everything else is supported. But hopefully there's no issues overall, different things when it comes to the balance, but looks like balance and performance are fine. I think the handheld mode, it makes it pretty easy on what to play at with 1080p 60 frames per second, whereas the ultra quality, that's going to be 30 frames per second. With this type of game, like F-Zero style racing game, you want to be able to play that in 60 frames. So Shinin are great. They know what they're doing with the performance. This game supports a plethora of features, even game share as well. So we'll be covering it as we get closer and closer to the launch. But what do you guys think about all the different topics that we discussed here when it comes to fast fusion and more Xbox games coming to Nintendo Switch? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.